Hello and welcome to Drop That Beat. I hope everyone is doing great today. We have a really cool assignment for you. So let's just get started. Today's lesson number 2 is entitled Caution, and we're going to be learning about the basics of making beats. We're going to create a basic beat using Bandlab's drum grid, or otherwise known as beat mapping. For those of you who are pretty new to this, and hopefully this is a beginner's course, so I'm going to assume everybody is really a novice or a newbie. This is what a grid pattern looks like in our software that we're going to be using, and it's used to create a visual representation of a drum pattern. And you can see here, these are the different parts of the drum set. These are little icons. And we're going to create patterns in this grid that will represent a rhythm. And this data is going to be translated into something that the software can read. A DAW, or digital audio workstation, is what professional music composers and producers and everyday people like us who just enjoy creating music will use. And it can be a little bit scary at first, but we're going to try to make it as simple and as fun and as painless as possible. So let's get started. I'm going to ask you please to go ahead and log on to Bandlab. If you don't know how to log on to Bandlab, we do have a little video on that, so please refer to that video. We'll try to include it in the link in the description if you don't have it. All right, once you log into Bandlab, you're going to go to teacher assignment number 2, and it's going to open up a project, and we're going to be working in that project in just a moment. But first, just join me as we talk very quickly about the parts of the drum set. Now, you can always do this a little bit more research on your own if you like, but since we're going to be making beats and we're going to be using different parts of the drum set one at a time, it's kind of helpful if you understand some of the parts of the drum set. So this first big drum, which is the lowest sound, is the bass drum or the kick drum. Okay. This guy right here is the snare drum. It's probably one of the highest drums on this particular set. Here are tom-toms, and they have like the middle part of the sound, mid-range. This is also a tom-tom, but it sits on the floor. It's rather big, so it's going to be lower sounding than the middle tom-toms, but higher sounding than the bass drum. So you may start to see a little pattern here that the larger the instrument, the lower the sound. We also have some cymbals. This is just a typical flat cymbal that you see. Sometimes it's called a crash cymbal. And here is what we have. We have hi-hat. Now, hi-hat can be played closed, like we see here. But there's a pedal that you could press, and it opens up the hi-hat, and we'll call that an open hi-hat. And it could be played open as well. So that's just very quickly parts of the drum set. So let's move on. It's important to understand before we start our project some main components of the software. Now, in addition to the project that you just looked at, in a sub-portion of that software is the machine grid, the drum machine grid, and it looks something like this. And again, we talked about this just a moment ago. we're going to be creating some rhythmic patterns on this grid. Just to familiarize yourself with some of the functions, this is our play and stop button. These letters are pattern banks. So we will create a pattern, and when we finish a particular rhythm pattern, it will say be pattern A. We can create a second pattern, and it will be pattern B. So we can save these patterns in different banks and can refer to them or add them to our project by pressing A, and it will add that pattern to our main composition. So when we talk about making beats, what does that really mean? So let's break it down just a little bit. First of all, the very basic beat is a steady beat. It is the pulse of the music. It's that repetitive rhythmic pattern that we kind of bob our head to, tap our foot to, clap our hands to. It's consistent with equal amounts of time between the beats. And if we look at our grid here, we have these purple buttons, and they represent, well, this is probably a snare drum, and it's 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. This is a pulse that is measured in groups of 4. Notice that we kept going back to 1, 2, 3, 4, and we repeated that. Now let's talk about rhythm. Rhythm isn't steady. Rhythm is a combination of long and short beats that are not equal to each other, and it's really what makes us want to dance. In most music, the rhythm does go in line or in sync with a steady beat. You can always listen to something rhythmic and find a steady beat, but it's the rhythm that makes us want to dance. Now, if we look at our grid here, we could see that these little patterns look pretty much like a steady beat, because you see the equal amount of spaces between each circle here, each dot. All right, but you see that these little dots look like almost like they're random, and these little dots are going to represent a really dynamic rhythm pattern. The grid is made up of 4 beats. 1, 2, 3, 4. And to help you distinguish between the beats, light gray, dark gray, light gray, dark gray, just so that you could see it better. Now each row, or each instrument that's represented on this grid, represents a different part of the drum set, and each is made up of 4 beats. So we see that, right? 1, 2, 3, and 4. Now, each beat is then divided equally into 4 smaller sections, and we can call them beats or we can call them subbeats. I'm going to try to refer to them as subbeats. Now we're ready to create our first beat in the workstation. So I'm going to ask you now to refer back, and let's go and start with a very simple beat. Let's go to our main workstation. Okay, assignment number 2. We're going to be learning the basics of making beats. So take a listen to our spooky themed composition. During our lesson, we will create a beat using Bandlab's drum grid or beat mapping utility. All right, and now you can just look for this little blue rectangle box We're going to ask you to click that to hide the assignment brief. You can just press the play button and take a listen. You see, it's very short, a little bit creepy, suspenseful, mysterious, right? Has a lot of tension. And we're going to be now adding a drum track to this composition. So we're going to start by selecting the drum machine track. It's empty, shouldn't have anything on it, and just tap on it to select the track. Next, we're going to go down to the bottom left-hand part of the workstation and just tap instrument, and that is going to open up our instrument that we're going to be adding, the drums. So the drum machine is going to open up. We're going to ask you to click somewhere in the middle where there are no dots. Right click and tap to clear the sample pattern, because we're going to be creating our own. Alrighty, let's start by creating a section A. You're going to notice that there is an A, the A is highlighted in like a teal or like a blue. Now what we're going to ask you to do is go down to the bottom of the grid and find the bass drum. It should be the very last icon. And what we're going to do is we're going to add by tapping here measure 1 and beat 1. And we're going to go to measure 4, subbeat 1, and add another kick drum or bass drum. Next, we're going to add a closed hi-hat, and it's going to look like this. It's going to be the letter O, and we're going to add the closed hi-hat at measure 1, subbeat 1. Measure 1, subbeat 3. Measure 2, subbeat 1. Measure 2, subbeat 3. Measure 3, subbeat 1. Measure 3, subbeat 3. And measure 4 on subbeat 1 and subbeat 3. So the closed hi-hat is kind of give us a little steady beat. So take a listen by pressing play and stop when you're ready to move on. If it doesn't sound right, just take a good look at the visual and make whatever adjustments you might need to make. All right, let's move on. So continuing on the A section, we're now going to add a snare. And that is going to be an icon that looks like this with the letter F next to it. And we're going to go over to measure 3, and we're going to go to the subbeat 1, or the first beat of measure 3, and add our snare. Now take a listen. How is that sounding?
Now that we've completed Part A, click Add A to add the section to the workstation. Then we will extend the section by clicking the top right corner and dragging it to just before measure 5.
So hopefully that wasn't too bad. We've got our A section on the workstation and it's sounding real good. But we want to make it more interesting. Let's create a B section, and that is going to be your job. So it just got a little bit more challenging, right? But don't worry, you're going to do great. So let's add a B section. How do we do that? What we're going to do is we're going to ask you to go over and click the letter B to compose your own section. And we're going to ask you to clear the grid because more than likely you're going to get a pattern that's like a sample. We don't want you to use that. We're going to do like we did before. We're going to find a place on the grid that's not occupied by a dot, right click it and clear the pattern. And then you're going to experiment with all of the different drum sounds to come up with your own section B. And remember, it's only going to be 4 measures when you finish it. Once you've finished creating your section B, you're going to go down and add B just like we did before, and it's automatically going to be added to the workstation.
Now we're going to take the A section and extend it all the way just before we get to measure number 9. Then we're going to select the A section again because we're going to go back and we're going to add that to our workstation. We're going to move the playhead to measure 9, hit add A, and now extend the A section all the way to the end of the piece. And that pretty much sums up this activity. Just press play and take a listen to it. Now if it doesn't sound the way you would like it, you could always go back and make some edits. Just remember to save your work as you go along. You'll find the save button right at the top right of the workstation. And when you're really happy with how everything sounds and you want to send it in, just hit submit and then we'll get it and we'll be able to respond. This is pretty simple. We'll get a lot more in depth and a lot more complicated rhythms, but for right now this gives you an idea. So play with it, practice, and enjoy.